Does Black life have to be sacrificed to get this moment? That's what the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of Episcopal Divinity School in New York and a leading American theologian, asked this week. She was appearing on a webinar, which was primarily to celebrate the new book, The Church Cracked Open, by the Reverend Stephanie Spellers. Spellers takes an unflinching look at the history of racial oppression in the church, especially the Episcopal Church, at how the moment we have been experiencing since George Floyd's death last May is breaking us open, and at how this might be exactly the gift the Episcopal Church and others like us need from the Holy Spirit to be broken open like this, to be broken open like the alabaster jar of ointment with which an unnamed woman anointed Jesus before his death, to be broken open as Jesus' death and resurrection broke open the world as anyone had known it thus far. Perhaps to be broken open as Jesus himself was broken open in laying down his life. The webinar about this book happened this past Wednesday night live, which meant it was also happening in the immediate wake of the guilty verdicts for Officer Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd, in the immediate wake of the killing of Ma'Khia Bryant, and in the immediate wake also of a number of white officials, commentators, and social media accounts beginning to talk about the verdict as the result of George Floyd, in their words, sacrificing his life for justice. So when Dean Douglas was asked to reflect on the verdict, this was her response, and I quote, "When the verdict came in, and even sort of now, it's like, whoa, we've never been here before. And I mean that, like, what just happened? This is something we've never experienced before in this moment. I'm old enough to remember Rodney King. I remember, obviously, Oscar Grant and Tamir Rice, we all remember. And so all of that came up for me that, does Black life, talk about atonement, does Black life have to be sacrificed to get to this moment? And I mean moment, because we don't know yet if it's more than a moment. And I said, how many Black lives have been sacrificed to get to this moment? End quote. Does Black life have to be sacrificed to get this moment? Or how many Black lives have to be sacrificed to get it? I want to highlight today a really important difference between the questions that Dean Douglas is asking here about Black lives being sacrificed to get this moment and whether that is needed at all. Between that and the assertion that Speaker Pelosi and Mayor Frey and many others made that George Floyd sacrificed his life for justice. Setting aside for this moment the question of whether one conviction can constitute justice, I invite you to notice the difference here in directionality, the difference in agency. On the one hand, we have white officials, and they were joined by this by many white pastors as well, praising George Floyd for sacrificing his own life to gain something better for others. On the other, we have a Black theologian speaking of George Floyd being sacrificed. Do you hear the difference? If George Floyd sacrificed his life, he made a choice. If not a choice to die, at least a choice to risk death. But George Floyd was not given a choice in the matter. Perhaps George Floyd was sacrificed, however. Certainly his life was taken from him. He did not have the power to choose between laying it down and taking it up. I am the good shepherd, says Jesus, who lays down his own life for the sheep. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, he says, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down and I have power to take it up again. I want to be careful not to overdo the distinction between George Floyd's death and Jesus' death, because it is crucial that we be able to look at George Floyd or Ma'Khia Bryant and see the face of Christ in their faces. If you look closely behind me, the blue icon on the wall is an image in the tradition of the Pietà, the tradition of Mary holding Jesus' lifeless body after it is taken down from the cross. And the face of Jesus in this icon is the face of George Floyd. The icon is named Mama. It is crucial that we be able not only to say that Jesus wasn't white, but that we be able to see Jesus in the specific faces of Black and brown victims of state violence. But it is also important not to erase the ways that Jesus was unique. In his full humanity, Jesus lived and died in full embodied solidarity with each of us, and particularly with those who have been crucified in every age, including our own, by power and cruelty. It's important that we be able to see how we might be called upon to stand in embodied solidarity with those who are being crucified today, taking a real risk to step out, not just with our words, but with our bodies, even if it means getting crucified ourselves. And we have to be careful that when we make these excellent theological comparisons, we do not go so far as to ascribe omnipotence to those who are oppressed. In his full divinity, Jesus had a power to lay down his life and then take it up again quickly that no human being has had since. Through Jesus' power, we have a sure and certain hope of resurrection, and that is worth everything. But we do not get the choice to cash it in and return to earthly presence with our family and friends 3 days later. That part was a singular event so far. There are no limits to how far we should follow Jesus, but there are limits to how far we can be Jesus. The sainted late Bishop Barbara Harris, the first woman and first Black woman to be ordained a bishop in the Episcopal Church, was known in her diocese for saying that our individual crosses are the burdens we choose to carry for Jesus, and we always have a choice in it. If someone puts the burden on you without your consent, it isn't your cross, it's oppression. I do think a cross can be both. It is possible for someone to make a sacrifice that is both their choice to make and a matter of oppression being involved. We know this by direct observation of the world, but also we know this because that is the kind of sacrifice Jesus made. The church has too often taught that Jesus' death was a sacrifice because Jesus had to die in order for God to love and forgive us. So let me be clear. This is what the church has often taught, but it is heresy. It is based in the idea that the God of the Old Testament is violent and vindictive and is superseded by a New Testament God of love. But there is no Old Testament God of violence that contrasts with a New Testament God of love. It is all one God. And it is a God who has been insisting since Isaac's brush with death in the 22nd chapter of the first book in Genesis, that God does not want us to sacrifice God's children. The God who would demand such a sacrifice is not the God who shows up in Genesis and Exodus and Amos and Isaiah and the whole arc of the Old Testament, or what Jesus and Paul and John just called Scripture. Jesus' death was a sacrifice for the same reason that Jesus' death was necessary in the first place, not because God demanded blood sacrifice for our salvation, but because that was the only way this story could play out in the kind of world that Jesus had to come himself to show how to love. The cross was necessary because the cross was people's response to Jesus' true life. The only way for Jesus to have avoided the cross, given the world he lived in, would have been for him to have been less himself, less God, less true to what he was supposed to be. He could have stopped preaching or told people to do what Rome said and keep the peace, or any number of things that would have mollified both the religious leaders of his day and the Romans. But he couldn't do that and live the way he came here to live, totally attuned to God's will and totally committed to the way of love. That life had to end in the cross, not because the cross was magic and would convince God to let us be saved, but because the cross is how the powers of this world respond to the good news of love. Now, Dean Douglas knows her Bible. Dean Douglas has studied Jesus' sacrifice thoroughly. Dean Douglas knows that Jesus has the power to lay down his life and to choose to take it up again. So I suspect, and here I am going beyond what Dean Douglas herself said on Wednesday, so this is me, not her, but I suspect that when Dean Douglas asks, does Black life have to be sacrificed? It is in the same spirit. It is a question akin to, was Jesus' death necessary? Jesus' death was necessary only to the extent that the world around him was violent. And every ounce of Jesus' teaching tells us the world does not have to be violent. The world does not have to be violent. As long as we choose to accept and maintain a violent world, a white supremacist world, then yes, Black lives will have to be sacrificed. There is no other way to maintain violent white supremacist control. But it doesn't have to be this way. This is what Jesus came to show us. This is what God sent the prophets and apostles and martyrs to teach us. It doesn't have to be this way. The way of love is possible. The way of love does not require sacrificing Black lives to get a tiny moment of justice. The way of love is ours to choose. Jesus' death is necessary because the world is violent, but Jesus' death is redemptive in a way no other death needs to be, because the empire's death penalty doesn't have the last word. Rome wants to say, you belong to us. You will play this game my way. If you try to be clever, if you try to be sassy, if you try to tell us any different, we will beat the humanity right out of you. We will break you. You will be like us, or you will be annihilated. And Jesus hangs on the cross and says, no. No. You can kill my body, but you cannot make me not human. You can call me king or Messiah, you can call me heretic and traitor, but you cannot make me not forgive you, and you cannot prevent me from opening paradise to anyone who is ready to follow me in right under your nose, right in the middle of your very empire. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. So let us love, not in words and speech, but in truth and action. This is his commandment, that we love one another as Christ has loved us. And this much we have power to choose. This is the moment in the sermon where most weeks we would put up a slide with reflection questions and invite your initial quick answers. But some moments I think are better met by questions first before answers. I don't think we are well served today by questions that allow for quick answers. So I'm going to ask Kendall if his tech is working again. I'm going to ask Kendall to give us a little instrumental background for a couple of minutes. And I invite you to take that time to notice what questions bubble up in you while he is playing. If you want to share your questions in the chat, you can, but what I really encourage you to do is to make note of what bubbles up and keep it where you can see it this week. Let your brain and your prayer come back to the questions again and again. See over the course of the week how God invites you to choose love. Don't rush to the easy answers. Sit with the questions. Kendall, would you play us into the questions, please? Thank you, Kendall.